I have a couple of housekeeping notes before we start. So the session, Surprisingly Rockin' JavaScript and DOM Programming in GWT, has been rescheduled. It'll take place at 2 o'clock in room 9. And there's going to be a repeat of the session, Building a Scalable Web Application with Google Apps Engine, at 12:45 p.m. in room 8. Finally, all sessions, including the fireside chats, will be posted by mid-next week on the Google I/O website. My name is Keith Golden. I'm the technical lead for the My Maps team. So for those of you who may not know what My Maps is, if you go to maps.google.com and click on the My Maps tab, you get various options for user-generated content. There's actually several things that fall into the My Maps tab. First of all, there's these little map creation tools that allow users to draw on the map. It's very much a WYSIWYG editor. Users can pretty easily add content however they like onto the map. They can share it with other users. Everything by default, unless they indicate that the content should be unlisted, is indexed by Google and is searchable on maps.google.com. In addition to that, there's also mapplets, which are, unlike the editing tools, very much oriented towards developers. So a maplet is it's an iGoogle gadget embedded inside Maps and using the Maps API. So whereas the My Maps editing tools are designed to be used by the casual user and don't require any programming expertise, mapplets, on the other hand, require developers to write code in JavaScript. But this kind of model where we have on the one hand, the kind of very simple editing tools that are for end users only, and mapplets that are for developers only, isn't really very satisfying. My Maps it's a very simple user interface, but it's also very much a one-size-fits-all solution. And we all know that one size really doesn't fit all. We've seen over the history of the Google Maps API that you developers can create far more useful and diverse applications on top of Maps than Google ever possibly could, even if we dedicated all of our engineers to doing nothing but writing Google Maps API applications. And there's no reason that editing tools should be any different. It was never our intention when we started the My Maps project to create a walled garden or to compete with our developers. Quite the contrary. Fundamentally, My Maps is only as good as its developers. And what we really want to do is we want to make all of you My Maps developers. So we're exposing My Maps to the Google Maps API. Now we're not, it would be very easy to just expose, a single sort of function, enable My Maps, that you can then call in your JavaScript code and put the My Maps tools in your API application, but that wouldn't be very useful, right? Because then all you'd be able to do is essentially have exactly the tool that we developed, but in your site rather than on our site. And that's not what we want. We don't want you to just take what we've written, right? We want you to surprise us. We want you to do something new and interesting. So instead, what we're doing is we're taking the My Maps functionality and we're exposing it in chunks, in sort of reasonable sized pieces that you can fit together however you see fit. And we're not releasing all of these chunks at the same time, but as soon as something is ready to release, we'll be releasing it. So I'm going to be talking about some of these pieces today. There are a number of ways you can put My Maps functionality in your own website. The first one is very simple, but I think it sort of bears mentioning, and that's you can simply embed a My Map in your website. And this is something that the media has been doing quite a lot of. You know, if they have some news story, they create a map that details, you know, the events around the story or the locations where the story took place, and they embed that in their website, and that's very easy to do. Slightly more sophisticated, you can embed a My Map in a Maps application, and I'll show you how that works. Additionally, just a couple of weeks ago, we released the My Maps polyline and polygon editing user interface to the Maps API. So you today can write applications that use that user interface. And finally, you guys are the first people outside of Google to learn that we're going to be very soon releasing a storage API for My Maps. This will be a GData API that allows you to write data directly to our servers. All the data you write, like any user-generated maps, is indexed by Google Search and is accessible by all My Maps users. Now, My Maps is, as I said, it's very much a lowest common denominator type of tool. But there are some advantages to that. As Michael Jones mentioned in his talk yesterday, very important applications like the fire map, the San Diego fire map created by the great people at KPBS would not have been possible if we hadn't created this very easy to use tool and made it so accessible. But there are a lot of, and there are other examples involving natural disasters, a number of disasters recently in China where My Maps has been used to good effect to get information out to users, to citizens in a time of real need. But there's a lot of other applications. I'll just get rid of this guy. So let me just show you a couple of maps that from this area that I came across more or less at random. The first one is pretty serious. This one is talking about pollution in the Bay Area and concerns environmental justice. And the interesting thing about this, it's a collaborative map. So there are 9 individuals who have 9 different users who've contributed to this map. And just members of community who have an interest in improving conditions in the city. And it's a very rich map. It includes YouTube videos. It includes various graphs. But there are a lot of different uses. So many people have been using My Maps for similar purposes. Anything from reporting crime in their neighborhoods to reporting the locations of potholes. Here's something a little more frivolous. I just love this thing. It's called San Francisco Tourist Sites for People You Hate. And it was created by 3 people who live in San Francisco. For those of you visiting from out of town, I do not recommend that you follow the advice in this map. But anyway, it's very funny. So what we would like is the applications, the maps that users can develop with these tools are very general purpose, right? We're not developing mapping tools for specific use cases, right? But we know that the ideal user interface for creating a bird watching map is going to be different from the ideal user interface for, say, a map for hiking trails. As Google, we just can't. We couldn't possibly implement all these very special case applications. But we're hoping that members of the developer community will be motivated to do so. So that's what we hope to get out of it. Okay. So how do you use My Maps in your own website? As I mentioned, the simplest thing you could possibly do is simply embed a map. This is the same map I showed you, San Francisco tourist sites for people you hate. And then this is all the code necessary to do that. It's basically just an iframe with a URL that that links back to the My Map that you want to link to, with a couple of extra URL parameters. You don't have to know what these parameters are. All you have to do is click on the link to this page, and down here you get the code to paste to embed in your website. That is, if I had a map up, it would show that. Okay. So slightly more interesting, you can import a My Map from within a Maps API application. And the reason this works, there's two things. First of all, you can output the content of any My Map as KML or GeoRSS. And you simply specify the output equals KML or output equals GeoRSS to the URL for the My Map. And the other thing is that using the GGeoXML object in the Maps API, you can take a KML or GeoRSS file from a publicly accessible URL and display that on a map. So putting these things together, again, we get the same San Francisco tourist sites map. Okay. But it looks like I just did the same thing I did on the previous slide, only with more code, right? So what does this buy you? Well, what it buys you is you have more control over what actually gets displayed. For instance, you could display multiple maps at the same time. Let me just edit this code a little bit. I'm going to make this thing here a global variable. You'll see why in a minute. Run this again. Okay, so this GGeoXML object is simply a map overlay. And like other map overlays, you can call various functions on it. For example, I could say GeoXML hide and run this code, and then that goes away. And if I want to see it again, I can say show. So you can see how you could simply hand draw a bunch of content, if that's what you want to do, using the My Maps tools, then create some nifty user interface that displays this content, allows users to select different layers, however you like. Okay, but that's not all. So as I mentioned, we're also exposing the actual drawing tools in the API itself. So you can add My Maps editing functionality in your own API site. So suppose you wanted to develop a site and you want users to be able to input information about their city, maybe various landmarks in the city, various buildings. Well, the first thing that would be useful to do would be to allow users to be able to just indicate where the buildings are and maybe draw polygons to outline the buildings. And you can now do that very easily in the Maps API. So the first thing you do is you create a polygon object, but you create an empty polygon. That is, a polygon that has no points. And you add it to the map. And then you call this new function that we added, this new method, enable drawing. Right, and that's all you need to do. Let me show you how that works. OK. So when you call enable drawing, the user can simply click on the map, and every click adds a point to the polygon. OK. So that's good. But this is a pretty ugly polygon. It doesn't really outline the building very well. And at this point, I'm stuck. I've drawn it, but now it's totally non-interactive. Right? So I also want to be able to edit it. So you can do that too. Seem to have lost a level here. Let me back out. OK. So we added two other functions, enable editing and disable editing. And these do what you'd probably imagine they do. Note that I'm not just calling these functions. I'm using the gEvent object to create listeners. This bind function is just one variant of adding a listener to a specific object in the Maps API. So in this particular case, I'm adding a listener to the polygon object, and I'm listening on the mouse over event. So we added mouse events relatively recently to polygons and polylines, so you can get click events, mouse over events, and mouse out events. And so putting these together, every time the user mouses over the polygon, I'm going to enable editing, and every time the user mouses out of the polygon, I'm going to disable editing. And if I run this code, actually, I guess I ran the code. Then I can mouse over, and I can, refine my shape and make it outline the building better. Okay. So, but I still don't like this very much. So I've managed to change the shape, but I don't really like the color very much. So let's change that. I don't know why we were missing a map tile level here. Okay, so we added two new functions, set stroke style and set fill style. Set stroke style just changes the style of a polyline or the border of a polygon, and set fill style changes the style of the fill. So color here is just a hex, color string, just like you use in HTML. Opacity is a number from 0 to 1, and weight is an integer that specifies how thick the line is. And similarly for fill color and fill opacity. And all I'm doing here is I'm setting all these to random values. And I'm doing it whenever I get a click event on the polygon. So I run this code. Every time I click on the polygon, I get a different style, and I can just kind of cycle through these until I find one that I like. Okay, so that's good. But I don't really like all this fiddly detail that I just added. It makes it look like someone took a bite out of the building. So I want to get rid of that. How do I do that? Well, I could drag all these points. Oh, incidentally, something I forgot to mention. For those of you who aren't very familiar with the My Maps API, the My Maps drawing tools, note there's actually two different kinds of vertices here. There's these little sort of squares. There's a square at each vertex, but there's also these squares in the middle of the line segments. And what these do is they just allow users to easily add new points. So if I drag on one of these vertices, then it adds a real vertex to the shape. And we found in testing that users like this quite a lot. Okay, but what if I want to delete a vertex? Well, we added a function, a new method, delete vertex, which takes the index of the vertex you want to delete. Conveniently, we also added an optional argument that gets passed to a click listener anytime the click happens to be on a vertex. So if the click isn't on a vertex, this value will be undefined. If it is on a vertex, it'll be a number. And the number is the index of the vertex. So when I run this code, then I click on a vertex, and it goes away. Note that the color also changed because I still have the listener that I added previously. I could easily change that so that I make those actions exclusive. I simply don't change the color if the click happens to be on a vertex. Okay. Well, you can delete a vertex. What about inserting a vertex? As I showed you, users can insert vertices just by dragging on those midpoints, but maybe you don't like our user interface. Maybe you'd like to take control of that completely yourself, or in some other way programmatically add a vertex to the polyline. Oh, incidentally, if you don't like all those midpoints, you don't want users to be able to add points to your line, there's an optional argument you can pass to the enable drawing or enable editing functions, max vertices. And if that value is equal to or less than the number of vertices in the shape, then the user will not be able to add any more points, and those midpoints won't show up. And if you want to, you can kind of take control over things. So here's something it's kind of whimsical I wrote to. What this will do is every half second, so I'm going to create a polyline, and every half second I'm going to add another vertex to it. So you can use this however you like. Okay. Well, I showed how you can draw a polygon by using the enable drawing method. And the same, of course, works for polylines. But there's something also a little bit more interesting you can do. Let me step through this code here. So the first thing we're going to do, just like in the case of the polygon, we're going to create a new polyline object with no vertices, and we're going to add that to the map. Then we're going to call the enable drawing method on that polyline. And so just like before, let the user draw a new polyline. Additionally, we're going to add a couple of new listeners. Just as with the case before with the delete vertex, we're going to add a click listener on the vertices. But I'm only interested in clicks on two specific vertices, namely the first one and the last one in the polyline. If the user clicks on the first vertex, then I want to call enable drawing, but I'm going to pass in this optional from start argument. And if the user clicks on the last vertex, I'm going to say that from start is equal to false. So running this code, so the first thing I do is the user creates a polyline, and now if I click on the last point, I can add more points. I click on the first point, I can also add more points, and I can keep doing this until I get bored. Note if I click on any other point, nothing happens. There are a number of new events that we added that allow you to watch what it is that users are doing, right? Because this wouldn't be very interesting if all you could do is allow users to sort of scribble on the map, but you can't actually respond to their actions. What you'd like to do is allow users to create objects, and then you might want to have some UI that shows the objects that they created and save the data to a server so that they get the same thing when they, data when they come back to your site. And all of that you can do. But in order to do that, you need to know when the user has actually completed an action. So here again, I'm using the gEvent object to add listeners to the map. In this case, I'm just going to add listeners to a bunch of events here that we've recently added. Not all of these incidentally are currently documented in the on our API website, but I promise that they will be soon. So let's just see what this does. So when I mouse over a vertex, you notice here in the corner, you get this red text here. This is just indicating the name of the event that gets triggered. There's a few arguments, that will get passed to your listener that tell you a little bit more information about these, the nature of these events. Like if I mouse over vertex, what the index of the vertex was, and what kind of vertex it is. Because I also get a mouse over event if I mouse over one of the midpoints. Okay, so I get the mouse over point event. So maybe you want to do something different, kind of take finer control of the user interface. You're certainly welcome to do that. If I extend the line, note every time I add a point, I'm getting a line updated event. And when I finish drawing, I get an Endline event. And similarly, if I drag a point, I also get a line updated event. Okay. I'd like to call attention to two events in particular that you should know about, and that's Endline and cancel line. One of these two events will always get triggered when the user has stopped drawing a line or a polygon. So let me just sort of illustrate what this code does by example, and then I'll kind of step through the code and show you. So the first thing is I have this, first thing I do is I call this start poly function. And this is adding a new polyline. It's calling enable drawing, which you're now very familiar with. And so this allows me to draw a new polyline on the map. Okay, now note I've added a listener on the Endline event. So when I double click to end the line, note that this now says, has a little bullet that it just added that says 6 vertices, because there are 6 vertices in this polyline. So the way this works is I have a listener on the Endline event, and when the event gets triggered, I simply, I'm just modifying the content of this slide, and stating the number of vertices. Note that I then call start poly again. So as you might expect, I can then draw another line. And now it tells me 4 vertices. And now it tells me 2 vertices. What do you suppose is going to happen if I try to draw a line with 1 vertex? Well, let's find out. So I click again. No, nothing happened here, right? Because the Endline, Endline event was not triggered. Instead, this other event was triggered called cancel line. And the reason for that is that a polyline with 1 vertex is not a valid polyline. And so we can't consider the completion of that to be correct. Something with 0 dimension, even though it's there on the map, there's no way that the user could possibly see it or interact with it. So that's not a good situation. But note that we actually, the API code is not going to remove that overlay from the map for you. It's your responsibility to do that yourself. It's probably not particularly harmful for it to be there because the user can't see it or interact with it. But anyway, if you get a cancel line event, you should probably call remove overlay just to kind of clean up that cruft. And note again, we call start poly so we can draw another polyline. Okay. So putting it all together, if you guys don't like our user interface, that's fine. Now you can write your own. This is a very simple My Maps implementation written in the Maps API. You can find this example on the Maps API blog. And if you want to see the actual code, I'm not going to show it here, but just kind of drill through from this URL, and you can find all the code for that. But really, I don't need to show you the code because you now know exactly how to write this. So I have the editing tools here. Put down a place mark. You could do that already. Drag a place mark. You could do that already. Draw a polyline. You know how to do that. Note that whenever I drag a point, it's updating this entry here to tell me how long the point is. The function here is just get distance. It's part of the Maps API. And as you can probably guess, I'm simply updating this anytime an update line event is triggered. And then the same thing for polygons. So every time I do this, it updates the area of the polygon. And again, there's a function in the Maps API, get area, that will show you the area. And as before, I'm changing the stroke style when I click. And if I click on a vertex, it calls delete vertex. So this is, 100, 150 or so lines of JavaScript. Most of it is just actually dealing with all this stuff right here. It has nothing to do with the actual API code for drawing and editing, which, as you saw in the previous slides, is very simple to do. So I hope you all will show us how it should be done and implement your own versions of My Maps. Now, when I run this code, it's the data isn't going anywhere, right? This is all just stuck in the client, and if I hit reload, then it just all goes away into the ether. You can, of course, talk to a server, store the data on a server of your choice in a format of your choice. But we really wouldn't, my job would be half done if this is all that we had to offer. It's not enough to expose the user interface for My Maps editing, right? We also want to expose the backends. So if you really want to write a better version of My Maps, you should be able to do so and have the data stored just like all the other My Maps that users create. And so I'm pleased to announce that we're very soon going to be launching a storage API for My Maps. Now, Google, we don't often pre-announce things, but I thought it was really very important to take this opportunity with all of you developers to let you know about this. Partly because what you tell me can influence what this ultimately is. I have an implementation of this, but it can change and will change before we launch it. And in particular, it'll change based on your input. So let me know if there's something you think is really important to do, something you think is really important not to do. This is really for you. So anyway, the API is based on GData. So what we've done is we've exposed two GData feeds. Now, GData is just essentially it's basically an Atom feed. And if you want, you can learn all you'd ever want to know about GData by following this URL. I'm not going to give you an introduction to GData here. But it's very nice. It has some very nice client tools, and it's easy to work with. So we've added 2 feeds. The first is a map feed, and this is just the list of maps you've created. And the other is a feature feed, which is the list of features in a particular map. And because this is GData, these feeds aren't just like write-only feeds. You can actually, read-only feeds. You can write data back. GData supports, supports get, post, put, and delete, which collectively mean you can list all the contents of a feed, add an element to a feed, remove an element from a feed, or modify an element. So in other words, you can do anything that we can do when we're talking directly to our servers. Now, GData is just the transport mechanism. Right? We actually need to represent the content of this map data. And we didn't want to implement yet another format, right, for representing geospatial data inside GData. So what we've done is we're just using KML, or GeoRSS if you like, embedded inside the Atom content tag. So most of you are very comfortable working with KML. We have a number of tools available for working with KML. And so you can just use KML or again GeoRSS. GeoRSS is a little bit lossier. We don't have any of the style information, but that's there if you want it. And of course, as I said before, all this data is stored on our servers. It's indexed and searchable by Google Search. Of course, if you want to run your own storage site, you're certainly very welcome to do that. And we hope that if you do that, you'll make the data crawlable by Google, putting it in a format we recognize, such as KML, and putting it in an accessible, publicly accessible website so we can find it. If you'd like to expose it to Google Search. But if you use the storage API, then you get that for free. Okay. Most GData APIs to date are really kind of centered around the notion of giving the developer access to a user's data. So think, calendar, right? So I might write an application that maybe adds events to someone's calendar or does something like that. And so the code, written by the developer has to be able to sort of get access to the user's credentials. And this is done using Google Auth Sub. So this works is the user sends a request to the developer's website. The developer sends back a redirect to a proxy, which allows the user to then log in, to their Google account. So it goes through the user goes through the login process. The proxy then redirects the user back to the developer site with an additional authorization token that based on the user's credentials. And so the developer can then use the authentication token to represent the user. It says, yes, the user has logged in, and here's the proof. Now this is useful, and if you wanted to, for instance, write a better version of My Maps, just a better user interface to allow users to access their own data, this would be the way to do it. But I think that another really important use case is sort of turning it the other way around, right? Rather than allowing a developer access to a user's data, right? Why not allow a user access to developer's data? That is to say, as a developer, you have some website. Maybe it's something to allow people to, input hiking trails or biking trails. Well, you want every user who comes to the website to get the same data, right? You don't want each one to have their own trails. That wouldn't be very useful, right? It's, this is all about community. So what you want is you want a single map or maybe multiple maps that are owned by the owned by the developer, and allow the user to write to it using the developer's website. Now, one simple way to do that is the developer could simply say, okay, this map is, we have collaboration, options, collaboration controls. You can indicate that a map is open collaboration, which means anyone can edit it. So the developer could say anyone can edit it, and then just, use just allow the users to log in as themselves, and, make any changes to the map. But what happens then if a malicious user comes along and says, I don't really like this developer, right? The user can easily get access to the ID of the map, right? Go to it directly in the My Maps tool, right? Because it's open collaboration. The users they come along and delete all your content, right? Not very nice. So we want a way to authenticate the developer, right? So that we know that any request is coming from the developer's code and not malicious code controlled by the user. Fortunately, this also is easy to do. So what we do instead of auth_sub is we use client login. That is, the user sends a request to the developer's website. The developer is simply logging in as themselves using a client login. The user never sees any of this authentication information. It's entirely contained within the developer's website. So the only way that the user could possibly access the data is through code that you as a developer wrote, and therefore is safe. Okay, so this code is very easy to write. There's a lot of great client libraries in GData in a variety of languages. Here is an example of a very simple application. This is the entire code, with the exception of a few constant definitions, which aren't really very important. And to kind of motivate what this slide does, let me go back to the My Maps user interface. Suppose I have a map that I created. Has a lot of place marks. In this case, it's place marks, indicating the locations of various cities in the United States. But I decide I don't like this very much. All these blue markers is really boring, right? I recently discovered I can change markers, so I can basically go and click on the let's see. Right, that's not from this map. It's from a different map. Let's see, what map is that from? This guy, Google Real Estate Search. Okay, make that guy go away. Okay, anyway, click on a marker, change it to a different color, whatever. Right? And, if you happen to have like 300 markers in your map, well, have fun with that, right? It's going to take you a while. But you're a developer. You're a smart guy, right? A smart woman. You can write code, right? Why should you be limited to going through and clicking on each marker and changing the style? Well, there's no reason you need to. So what I'm doing in this code is this is simply a function to sort of mass change all of the icons in a map to some other icon. Say, this is cities in the United States, so I want to replace every marker with a majestic eagle representing the United States. Okay. So let me step through this code. Right. So the first thing we do is we just get the URL. This is simply the feed URL for the features in the particular map that I want to change. I'm creating a new instance of a Google service, in this case a Maps service object. And then I call the getFeed method on this object with the URL of the feed that I want to get. Now this is all synchronous code. So after I've executed this code, I have the contents of this particular feed. And so I can just iterate over it. I go through each feature in the map, and, each entry. A feature, in case I forgot to tell you, is simply a single thing on the map. It could be a place mark, a polyline, or a polygon. So in this particular case, my map only has place marks, but it doesn't really matter. So what I'm doing here is a little bit hacky. I don't really recommend this as a way, general programming practice, but it kind of gives you the idea. I'm simply taking the KML content of the feed and just treating it as a blob of text. And then I'm going to do a regular expression, search and replace on that text. So for each feature entry, I get the entry. I do this regular expression replace, and then I write it back. I call this update on my service. I use the URL that was identified for this particular entry as the edit URL. Happens to be the same as the viewer URL, but that's just a detail. And then under the covers, it's going to do the HTTP, put action, post put action to modify the contents of that feature. So let's see how that works. So I'm just going to run that code. Oh, the other thing I should mention is this code is not really very efficient. As I mentioned, this is all synchronous, so each entry is going to be updated after I get the response from the last entry update, which is kind of silly because I don't actually need the result for anything. But anyway, so now I'm going to exploit a little detail of the My Maps user interface. If a map happens to be collaborative, then anytime I save a change to the map, it's going to also load the map to see if there are any other changes that other users have made. So let me just do that right now. Okay, so maybe not bald eagles, but Benjamin Franklin actually supposedly advocated the turkey as the national bird of the United States. He thought it was a far more noble bird than the bald eagle. So that's all there is to it. So this is a kind of frivolous example, but you can imagine, you can write your own code to generate content, whether it's in a standalone application or a website, however you like. And as I said, these details are not written in stone at this point. I really, really want to find out from all of you what you'd like from us. I got a great example just yesterday of something. A developer requested a feature that was just so trivially simple to implement. Basically it could be done in an afternoon. And as soon as he mentioned it, it's like, well, yeah, of course this would be useful. But it just had never occurred to me. So I really want to find out what we can do to help you guys. So that's my talk. Refer you to the documentation for code.google.com and specifically the Maps API documentation. want to remind you all to fill out the evaluation forms on your seats, and any questions you might have.
Yep. So you mentioned that we can access features, but what about the underlying imagery? So if we had our own maps, will that be part of the storage API? I could, I have a very detailed map from an art district in Beijing. Can I upload that and make that part of my map?
Yeah, absolutely. You can use this as a way of uploading data.
Okay. And how much storage will we get?
That's a very good question. We haven't decided on that detail. I mean, certainly, at least initially, we'll have to impose some kind of limit, just because we have no idea what to expect. We're not, trying to, pose any restrictions, but we want to make sure that we don't, we don't run out of space ourselves.
Any thoughts on file size at this point?
So I should tell you that right now there's a limit. Actually, it's a limit we hope to overcome relatively soon. Not on the amount of data you can store in a map, but the amount of data you can get back. Currently, if you list the contents of a map, it's only going to give you the first 10,000 features. But even I think probably in the initial release of this data API, we should be able to circumvent that. So I don't see the need to impose any specific limits on the size of a map. Obviously, we need to impose some limits on the total amount of data, and there are practical considerations just in terms of the user interface, the user experience. There's limits. There's currently practical limits on the amount of data that we can send back in response to a particular request. So anyway, all these limitations will be documented.
Do you have a date?
No.
Okay. And
soon.
One other thing I was surprised about is I had understood that the GData APIs were going to center on OAuth as a way of doing delegated authority, as opposed to using the proprietary Google version. Mm-hmm. So is that something that might change before you release?
Absolutely. As I said, none of this is really written in stone. We've certainly, we've looked at OAuth and we've talked to the GData team about that. Mm-hmm. Our goal is to be as open as possible.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
For polygon and polyline features, are there any plans of implementing drag, rotate, resize tools?
We don't have any immediate plans to do that. Seems like a very useful thing. I would certainly welcome you to implement that. Rotate a polygon, right? So a little bit of vector math. You could, a little bit of trigonometry. You could do using using JavaScript. We'd love to see what you do.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for the storage capabilities for the KML. That's a great extension. Do you have any plans to potentially extend the functionality to beyond storage? Like one example would be if you're using mobile applications and you want to do geofencing, just simple queries to say like, am I in a polygon, that sort of thing.
So I missed some of what you said. You're talking about mobile applications.
Yeah, sorry. If I'll speak up. If you don't have full access to a Google interface, for example, on a mobile application, mm-hmm.
And
you're putting real-time data in storage, are there any plans to extend this, what you have on the server to be on storage? Like, for example, simple queries like is in polygon, that sort of thing, and come back with results.
So by is in polygon, do you mean to do a search for things that are inside a polygon, or do you mean?
Yes, but on the server rather than like
right.
implementing it on the client side.
Yeah. So no. So that's a very good idea. I can't talk about any specific plans as far as that goes, but yeah, that's a great idea. We'll certainly think about that. Okay.
First of all, thank you. We've been waiting for that for a while. You're getting really close to an online GIS editing system, so any thoughts about extending it to include topology between the geometric features and storing multiple attributes for a geometric feature?
Yes, so multiple attributes is something that we will support. We actually currently do have back-end support for it. It's not exposed in the user interface, but the GData API would be a great way to do that. So we will support attributes. As far as more advanced GIS features, we have the burden, in My Maps that we really need to provide a tool that's very sort of simple for average users and doesn't confuse them too much. So anytime we add an advanced new feature, we need to consider how many people are going to benefit from it versus how many people are just going to get confused by it. But the great thing about putting things in the API is that you guys can implement much more advanced, specialized interfaces than we could, and so we want to do everything we can to enable you to do that.
Hello. This is a question whether you think this is a good idea or a bad idea about using My Maps for real-time event tracking. Like, let's say you have a marathon and there's 20,000 runners, and you want to use My Maps to, show them and all in real time with the data API. Do you think that's a bad idea, a good idea, or
So that's
practical?
something you could do with the existing Maps API. I don't think it's not clear to me that My Maps specifically buys you anything for that. If you're trying to show something real time, then you're not probably interested in kind of like archival storage of it, right? You want something that's being constantly updated.
Yeah, but you also want to store. You also want to. People want to see the results afterwards and see where they were. So it's.
Yes, I mean you could do a hybrid approach as well. It's entirely up to you. I mean, certainly, you're welcome to do that. You're welcome to use it for that purpose. I'd say, in terms of giving access to live events, simply serving it up to users directly in the Maps API is probably the simplest thing.
This may be explained by maybe not many people using it, but would there be a future support for like drawing circles, like a radius of 5 miles around a point?
Whether and when we'll have a circle tool in the My Maps user interface, I can't really say. It's something I'd personally like to have. But again, that's also something that you could easily implement on top of the existing UI. Essentially, draw approximate a circle using a polygon, right? It's a little unfriendly, if you wanted to kind of use the My Maps storage, because then you're just storing it as a polygon, and then so yeah, that's something we've certainly thought about. I think personally it's worth doing. As with everything else, it's just a question of prioritizing against other features.
Thank you.
Seen a lot of great applications on the Maps API. Map My Run being one of the fantastic ones, and we've got a kind of a corporate implementation where we've copied some of what they've done on Map My Run to a very specific use case in our company. Can you tell me a little bit about how the storage mechanism has been done in the past, and whether we should consider, the My Maps storage mechanism, what the criteria would be for designing our own storage mechanism versus using the My Maps storage mechanism?
Yeah, I think the biggest advantage for using the My Maps storage is simply, there's a couple advantages. One, obviously, is you don't have to maintain your own storage, and I think that's pretty huge. But there are other ways you could do storage, right? You could write a Google App Engine application and write some Python code. And Pamela Fox wrote a great sort of demonstration application using the My Maps editing API on top of Google App Engine. So the main advantage of the My Maps storage in particular is that all of the data is in one place. anything that any functionality that we add is going to be applicable to your data. And as I mentioned, accessibility to search. Again, you can make your data accessible to search, but it's a little bit extra work on your part. And it's going to be subject to how often we do the crawl. In general, data is going to be index is going to be a little fresher if it's going directly to our servers. But I'd love to hear specifics about this application and what we can do to serve you.
Is there a way with the existing API to, during an editing, when an editing is enabled, is there a way to snap those vertices to the road network on the base map layer?
Very good question. There isn't currently, and I can't talk about when that might be available, but it's a really good idea.
You probably covered this, but what is the limit as far as storage on My Maps and the pricing, if there is a limit to the free?
So that's a detail we still need to determine. Certainly there will be some limit just to kind of keep us safe. But yeah, we need to figure that out and specifically figure out how that also interacts with the application, with the enterprise maps license. So we'll let you know.
Right now on each map, on the left-hand side, management of My Maps, they're discrete maps. Is there some way in the future to have a layering type, different layers associated with each map, similar to documents where you have file folders and all, but could I have layers associated with one map?
That's a very good idea. KML supports the notion of folders. That's something that we don't currently have support for. But it's certainly something that's on our radar. We'd love to add it. Again, as with the question about circles, it's something we want to do. We have to balance that against other things that we also want to do. And so I can't really comment on when that might be available. Okay, well, looks like there's no more questions. Thank you.